We are gonna do a question which is flying of a bird of a bird is an example of composition of composition of vectors. Okay, so I actually tried to shoot this video once again sometime while, but the video got corrupted. So I actually have the figure of the bird already. So um, in the original video, I actually showed you how I made the figure, but sadly that's not gonna be your day today. So let's just look at this bird. So if you have a bird, it's all is gonna move like upward and forward. So it's gotta get some lift that makes it go upward, and it also gotta move forward. So it's gonna flap its wings. Let's say it flaps its wing like this. Um, my interpretation of it flapping its wing, and it's gonna create forces or movement. So let's make these vectors. Let's make him white, and let's make him thicker, and also copy that and rotate it. So make it like this. So the each wing on its own is gonna create a upward and forward motion. So it's gonna create a forward motion and also upward motion. So you can think of it as going out of the screen, but not completely out of the screen. So if this is a plane, it's going something like this. So it's not completely going up, and it's completely not going straight, it's going somewhere in between. So that's what I'm trying to show, and I don't think this figure does justice to what I'm trying to say, but just think of it as it's coming out of the page and it's going a little bit upward and forward. So if you have a pen, place it on the table and think of you raising the pen a little bit. So if you raise the pen, you see that it's going in a forward direction if you take that as forward, and it's also going upward. So that's what I'm trying to say, if you understand what I mean. So if this is a plane, you have a pen and you raise it upward, so it's also going forward if that direction is forward, and it's also going upward, and so there is both forward and upward motion. So back to our case. So let's call this R1. Why not? And let's call this R2. So this can be force, this can be velocity, anything, but it's basically gonna be like same thing. So now to do justice to what I'm trying to show, I'm actually gonna copy these, and I'm actually gonna use think about which law would be much better. If you think um, if you ask me, I always prefer to use parallelogram law, since I find it much more easier to I don't know what how to say it, but I find it much more easier to use it rather than triangle law. But if this parallelogram does not fit, which seems it has fit, um, let's make this arrow normal one. Let's make it yellow, and let's make it have dashes. And also not yellow, let's make them the color that I write with, and let's copy that, let's rotate that, so we have that. So if this is a parallelogram, obviously the resultant is gonna go from the point that these two pass through. So this is gonna be the resultant. So red, and make it a little bit weighty, copy that, move it over here. Now let's label some of them. Let's call this vector resultant, so let's call it R. This will be vector R, this will be vector R1, and this will also be vector R1. So we have this, right? So now let's do some writing. So let's write what we are trying to express. Also, this R vector is gonna be R1 vector plus R2 vector, since this is the resultant of these two vectors. So if I don't have these two vectors, this one vector will be enough to represent the motion or of some sorts. So obviously, if this bird does not use like its full power in this wing, suppose it uses only this much power, because of course it can use different powers, since if it wants to move left or right, it will move this vector to different direction. So since it will change the parallelogram, So if I move it like this, then obviously the vector will look something like that. So you might be confused to how it moves left or right. So I'm not quite sure if it moves like that, but I'm just giving you something to think about. So let's write some writes it in explanations way. So first of all, we need to talk about if flying of bird is example of composition of vector. So I did composition of vector. Does that mean it is composition of vector? Yes, it does mean that. So let's write it with full and let's give it some emphasis. So yes, flying of a bird, flying of a bird, flying of a bird is an example of of composition of vectors. Um, so let's talk about why. So when a bird, so you can make all of these statements into a single paragraph, but I like to make them in points so that it's much more easier to read. So um, when a bird flaps its wings, flaps its wings, flaps its wings, it generates it generates it generates a upward and forward motion. So motion which has both magnitude and direction. So we are basically saying that it is a vector, magnitude and direction. So since birds have two wings, have two wings, um, two wings, if we let the vectors of the wings of the wings vectors of the wings be vector r1 and vector r2 respectively, then the forward motion which we suppose let's say the forward motion which we suppose, which is vector r, must be the net resultant um, so if I have to represent it, it's gonna be vector r is the addition of vector r1 and vector r2. So it must be the net resultant. So let's go to the next page, which is composition. So composition of vector as shown in figure. Hence flying of a bird is an example of composition of vectors. Is an example of composition of vectors of vector. So another question that can be asked from this is just changing the composition to addition, since it's basically the same thing for your level at least. So it might say composition or addition. In any case, it's gonna be the same thing. So in the next video, we are gonna do another question. Till then, bye bye.